when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and you'll rise again. Lift your head and look around, you will be found. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found. You'll be found. It's a place where we don't have to feel alone. Every time that you call out, you're a little less alone. If you only say a word, across the silence, your voice is heard. Oh, someone will come running. Take you home. Take you home. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, so reach up and to rise again. If you only look around, you will be found. You will be found. You will be found. Out of the shadows, morning is breaking. All is new. All is new. Standing up the enemy, silently I see that all is new. All is new. You are not alone. 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 Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need someone to carry you, when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So reach up and you rise again. If you only look around, you will be found. You will be found. You will be
Friends, it is a true blessing to be here with you today as we push pause on our normally very busy lives and take a moment to come together to remember, honor, and give thanks for the lives of those we have loved and lost to suicide. Though they are no longer with us in body, we express our gratitude for the memories we have of them, for our love for them that will live on, and for this community where we are held and supported and knit together by our common loss and understanding. As the past president of the Board of Directors for Mental Health America Lakeshore, I want to personally thank all of you for being here today and to express my appreciation for our Board of Directors and staff. As we prepare to embody our shared grief by running or walking, I invite you to join me in preparing our hearts with a word of prayer. Gracious God, you have spoken your word deep within us. Help us to hear your wisdom and to feel it in our bones. You have called us to a life that liberates and is liberating. So as we gather here today to honor, remember, and support one another, may we sense the strength we have together to create a way where it can sometimes seem like there is no way. As people who have felt the weight of loneliness and fear, of anxiety and grief, empower us to be a healing balm for one another, a voice of hope when the way seems dark. As the body of Christ, let us stand on the ground of the good news that calls us to work toward abundant life for all people. For those with mental disease, for an end to stigma, ignorance, and rejection, and for healing across generations of trauma and addiction. Loving God, we are so deeply thankful for the gifts this community shares and for those who support the mission and ministry of Mental Health America Lakeshore. May the work we do today bring healing and hope for those who need it most, and may the love and light present in this space and in each precious one gathered here today shine brightly in your world, reminding others that they are not alone. Creator God, you have made every person in your image. Let us not forget that we are so very loved, and nothing in or of this world can separate us from that love. Guide us in your ways of justice, peace, and grace, and empower us to be hope and love in all the ways we can, for all the people we can, for as long as we possibly can. Let all of God's beloved say, Amen.
Amen.
At this time, I would like to introduce our Executive Director, Julie Preeter.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for attending the 18th annual There is Hope event. Thank you to the Lakeshore Chorale, all of the volunteers for kicking off our ceremony with love and warmth from your beautiful voices. We appreciate your time and dedication to mental wellness through music. This year, Mental Health America Lakeshore celebrates 70 years in our community. Yes. We are one of 2 affiliates left in the state of Wisconsin and one of 144 affiliates across the nation. This necessary work that we do for our communities is possible because of all of you and like-minded partners. Because of you, we have served over 10,000 individuals each year with information and assistance, programming in our schools, community, and workplaces, support groups, and advocacy. This work is a collective effort by everyone. We need you by our side. In 2022, our nation experienced the highest rate of suicide ever recorded. In our county of Sheboygan, we lost 13 members last year. Men continue to have the highest rates of suicide over women. Everyone, continue to check on the men in our lives. Normalize emotions, and reach out for help. Last year, our nation launched the first ever 3-digit 988 number for immediate access to a trained counselor. Since the launch of July of last year, 5 million people across the nation have reached out for help, and Wisconsin is among the top in the nation for call volume. We wish we did not have to have this event. We wish that suicide was not a part of our being. Our collective desire is to be with our loved ones that have lost the battle to their darkness, to have another moment with them, to shift their perception of self in the world, to hold them, to tell them that they are loved, that this time of struggle will pass. We lift each of our loved ones' names to this cause, and we will not let their loss live in the darkness. Look around today. Look at the colored beads. We are a movement. We are hope. We provide a voice for those who are no longer with us. Our hope is to save another life. we provide hope to one another. I ask you today to step out and talk to other people. Ask them why they're here today. Who do they walk for? Who do they advocate for? For those of you that are here today that have attempted a suicide, we say continue to believe that life has a purpose, that you have a purpose. Today would not be possible without all of you. A special thank you to our board of directors for leading our organization. To my colleagues, Dana, Dawn, Anna, David, and Todd, thank you for showing up each day to serve our community. To our There Is Hope committee and volunteers, this little committee puts on this event each year and brings love and dedication to raise awareness for suicide prevention. Thank you to Brenda Vetter and Liz Kessler for going the extra mile to make sure the event ran smoothly. If I could have Liz and Brenda raise their hand, they're somewhere here in the crowd. Liz and Brenda will be starting a group for mothers who have lost children at any age to suicide. Thank you. A big thank you to John Schulke, who's working in the back. He stands by my side each year to make sure that this gets all done the way that it should. I also want to thank all of you who I have met over the years. Your stories have changed me. I am so grateful for your friendship and love. To Eric Witt, who runs our suicide loss support group each month, thank you for holding space for our community with love and support. Last but not least, thank you to Christy, Doug, Mark, and Corey Lucky for starting this event 18 years ago in honor of their son, Nick. We hold his memory to the cause. We would like to thank all of our sponsors for their continued support, Acuity Insurance for always believing in mental health as a top priority for this community and financially supporting our event and other programs. To our gold sponsors, HSA Bank, Johnsonville, Valrath, Sargento, and Plymouth Advancement Association. To our silver sponsors, United One Credit Union, Marine Credit Union, the Sheboygan Police Benevolent Association, Altmeyer Electric, Life Point Counseling, Rogers Behavioral Health, Sheboygan Paint Company, Sign Me Up, Dogs to Dog Tags, Sartori, and Physicians Health Network. To our in-kind donations, we have a lot of food and a lot of bakery here today. A thank you to Johnsonville, Johnston's Bakery, City Bakery, Hartman's Bakery, Lakeside Pepsi, Rhonda Giebert, Leah Hibble, and Paradigm. Please make sure you grab sweets before you leave today. Todd Riggs with Studio Gear and Tom Ott, thank you for providing the AV today. It makes all the difference for this event. Thank you to all the donors and trail markers, raffles, and silent auctions. Every single dollar raised, this is our only event that we do each year to raise funds. Every dollar goes back to our programming. I would now like to introduce our keynote speaker, David Baer. David is an artist primarily working in the medium of moving images. Originally from Wisconsin, he has spent 15 years in New Orleans, where he founded Foster Bear Films, an indie production house, in 2011. He returned to Wisconsin in 2022 and started Wiz Content, a company focused on making creative content for the online and offline world. Suicide has impacted his life greatly since childhood, having lost a spouse, friends, and mentors, as well as dealing with his own suicidal ideations as a teen and young adult. Please help me welcome David Baer.
Hey everyone, I'm David. I'm a suicide survivor, both as someone left behind and as someone who's survived a lifetime with their own suicidal thoughts. My first memory of having anything akin to a suicidal thought is from the age of 6. My parents told me we were moving from the suburbs of Chicago to a new home in the suburbs of Minneapolis. Now, as an adult, this distance seems menial. I could be in one of those cities for breakfast and be in the other in time for an early dinner. But at the age of 6, that was an incomprehensible difference. They could have said, we're moving to Thailand, and it wouldn't have seemed any less foreign. I don't actually remember what my reaction to my parents was, what words I said, whether I protested or just accepted it. But my reaction mentally was to reject life for the first time. I didn't think I want to kill myself. I didn't even know such a thing was possible at that age. But it was the first time I thought, I wish I wasn't alive. I've often asked myself, why was that my instinctual reaction? And what I've arrived at is this. I was afraid of a life different than the brief one I knew. The future became unfathomable. Life suddenly became so unpredictable that I reacted by not wanting life. This instinctual suicidal ideation would continue for years. If I'm being honest, they continue right up until this moment now, here with you. Not everyone who considers suicide spends their whole life fighting these thoughts. For some people, it's a temporary affliction. But for many like myself, considering suicide is a survival response to an uncertain future, as natural as wanting water when we're thirsty. It's a voice that never completely shuts up. Its volume just fluctuates with life's context. For me, it was loudest during my preteen and early teen years. Puberty hit me hard, and it took me until my late teens to see the world as a place that I belonged in. But the steady drum of the void continued beating somewhere deep in me, and when the trumpets of joy pause for a breath, it's always there to fill the silence. So I found myself as an adult who chases trumpets, but that's another story. My relationship to suicide shifted in 2005 when I was 20. In spring of that year, after months of ideations, my father attempted suicide. He swallowed a bottle of prescription sleeping pills. My mother and youngest brother found him. I was doing something outside when my brother came running out of the house looking scared, confused, and furious all at once. All he said was, "Mom found a note," and he kept going. Having been aware of my father's ideations over the preceding few months, I knew exactly what kind of note he meant. I ran inside. I'll spare you and myself a retread of the details, but suffice to say, after what I felt like an eternity of trying to keep my dad breathing until paramedics arrived, they took him to the hospital, where his stomach was pumped, and thankfully he survived. But things didn't and couldn't go back to normal. This event was a personal apocalypse. In modern speech, we define apocalypse simply and dramatically as meaning the end of all things. But this is actually a misunderstanding. Apocalypse comes from the Greek apokalypsis, a derivative of the verb apokalyptian, which means to take the cover off. And that's what my father's suicide did. It took the cover off of everything. Most explicitly, perhaps, was the truth of who my father was. For better or worse, he'd always been my personification of a strong, self-assured, and ready for anything type of man. Suddenly, he was a human, full of fears, regrets, mistakes, and like my 6-year-old self when he told me that we were moving, he found himself faced with an unfathomable future. The cover coming off of my father's humanity made the covers come off my family's truths. My father, while imperfect by many standards, was a load-bearing column in the structure of our family life. With that strength removed, all of the other little weaknesses, the cracks and the fractures, the unseen molds and failing pipes, they all became obvious, and my family would fall apart in many ways over the next few years. We found beauty in the years since, both as individuals and as family, but the family that existed before that day was and is gone forever. This experience was still fresh a couple of years later when I moved to New Orleans, running towards a promising future just as much as I was running from a past that was broken beyond repair. I was 22 when I arrived. About 6 months after moving there, I met Alma. I was working at a cafe in the French Quarter, and she came in to apply for a job. Seeing her walk in that door was just like every cliche love at first sight trope from every romance going back 1,000 years. It was like light pouring in the door, like beauty I didn't know existed was suddenly right in front of me, like some long forgotten part of myself was suddenly found. My legs felt wobbly. My usual undeserved confidence was suddenly shaky. This isn't the story of my romance though, so I'll skip most of the details. But the short of it is, we fell deeply, madly, and inseparably in love. And less than a year later, we were married. And it wasn't some spontaneous run to the courthouse and tell everyone later sort of weddings either. We had the whole big to-do with gowns and suits and themes, music and food, family flying in from out of town. In typical New Orleans fashion, we even had a parade. We were married with a capital M. Going forward, there was no David without Alma. Now I'm going to backtrack in my journey a little bit. On our first date, after weeks of Alma always having vague excuses why she couldn't go out with me, I learned why she'd been saying no. She was an addict in recovery, 10 months into a 1-year stay in a live-in rehab facility. She hadn't told me this from the start because she was scared I wouldn't want to go out with somebody who's in recovery. But my response to learning this was quite the opposite. See, one of my major fears in dating at this time was my family background being too much for a potential partner. I didn't mention it earlier, but my dad's suicide attempt and the subsequent collapse of my family structure can all be tied back to addiction. Both of my parents are addicts, and both have experienced some of the worst consequences of addiction, from lost careers and ruined reputations, to prison time, to the death of children, and the list goes on. So while Alma was nervous to be transparent about her own recovery, I was terrified of falling in love with somebody who would leave me once they learned of where and who I came from. So in many ways, I was actually relieved to hear of Alma's situation. Who could better understand the aftermath of addiction than someone who was in recovery? And from her standpoint, who better to love somebody in recovery than somebody who already loves many people who are yet to recover? Anyone who has any experience with addiction and recovery knows the phrase relapse is part of recovery, or its wise older sibling, recovery isn't linear. Both are meant to say that in the journey towards lasting sobriety, stumbling is inevitable, relapses happen, and nobody ought to be shamed for them. This has been true for almost every addict to ever recover, and it was true for Alma. The 2 years and change after we were married was a roller coaster of successes and missteps, falls back into using, and all of the lies and secrets that go along with relapses. Now, before I dive into the very difficult things I'm about to discuss, I want to make one thing clear. My life with Alma was warm and joyous and full of love, home to all of the feelings anybody wants when they marry somebody. But beneath the happiness and love was a pattern that Alma had been in for a long time before she ever met me. A pattern that I can only imagine had already exhausted her spirit many times over. And that's the aforementioned pattern of relapse and recovery. The pattern went like this. She would relapse, then use in secret for days or weeks. One way or another, I would find out, and I would plead for honesty. She'd reinvest herself in her recovery, she'd have early success, and then we'd act like the job was done. And I say we very intentionally because this is where I, as a partner, bear some responsibility. We both wanted good times to be focused on good times, not on avoiding potential bad times in the future. So in the midst of our good times, Alma would relapse again. And not wanting to ruin the good time, she wouldn't tell me, and would even lie about it until I discovered proof to the contrary. And then the cycle would repeat. On our 2-year anniversary, she relapsed and lied about it again, and I was at my wit's end. I couldn't just accept another, sorry, this is the last time. I needed, and we needed, a new approach. She undertook an extremely difficult 30-day cold turkey detox program. Anybody who knows anything about kicking an opiate addiction knows that going cold turkey is a brutal experience. After detox, the program demanded that we live separately for at least 90 days because going back into normal routines can trigger a relapse. So she went and lived with a friend about a mile away. I stayed at our house. We still saw each other every day, usually for dinner and a walk. It was November 2011 at this point. We went to her parents' house in uptown New Orleans for Thanksgiving. It was lovely. Her parents and I were and remain very close, and the dinner reinforced why we were together despite everything. Because we were family from the moment that we met, and nothing could change that. After dinner, Alma said her friend that she was staying with had been getting on her nerves, and she was having such a good time, and asked if she could just stay the night at our house that night. And I said, yeah, of course, it's our house after all. So she did. Being Thanksgiving, this was a Thursday, and she'd go on to stay there all weekend, and it was truly wonderful. It was one of the best weekends that we'd had in ages. We watched movies on the couch, went on walks with our dog, made meals together. It was as you always hope married life would be. Monday morning came. I had to go to work, but not till later in the morning, so I made some pancakes for breakfast. Alma was feeling warm with togetherness. She came into the kitchen, put her arms around me, and said something like, let's just leave town. Let's go start again somewhere else and have a family. Leave the mistakes behind. Now I need to backtrack again. When Alma went into her difficult detox and recovery program, I went into therapy. It was her only request in exchange for what she was about to undertake. She recognized that if we were to get trust back in our marriage with any permanence, I need to work out my feelings with a professional. Not to mention a myriad of other reasons I probably should have been in therapy anyways. So at this point, I'd been in therapy about 6 weeks, My therapist had been adamant about sticking to our recovery plan. If Alma came home for good before the minimum 90 days recommended by her program, and then she relapsed again, all this would have been for nothing, and undertaking something this difficult again would be extremely unlikely. And despite how amazing our weekend had been, I was already feeling a bit irresponsible for us staying together in the house 3 nights in a row. So when she, with nothing but the best and sweetest intentions, suggested we just start life over again, an alarm went off in my mind saying, this is how you end up back where you started. So I told her that we have to stick to the program. We'd had a lovely weekend, but she needed to go back to her friends, and we had to stay committed to slow progress. The look in her eyes was heartbreaking, like a child who just found out that their pet had died. And let me be clear, at the danger of diminishing or infantilizing her response, I choose this comparison very carefully, because the look that was in her eyes, the innocence and the purity of it, is something I've only otherwise seen in children. And not because it's an immature response, because it's the only natural response to a terrifying future. By the time we're adults, we're taught to mask our disappointments so deeply that we often confuse ourselves into thinking we're less disappointed than we are. But Alma was always childlike in her hope, and I mean that in only the most praiseworthy way. We sat down with our pancakes. I don't think we actually ate a bite of them, and she pleaded with me. I didn't realize at the time what exactly she was pleading for, and I don't think she did either. But the truth is, she was pleading for her life. I'm afraid if we keep living apart, she said, that we'll never get back together. I tried to reassure her, but she was full of an unshakable doubt. If I could say no to running away together now, how could she be sure I wouldn't say no in the future, especially if she relapsed again? And who could blame her for being afraid? I can't. As for me, I was thinking in binary terms. Either we stick to the program and succeed, or we break the program and we fail. There was no middle ground, so I felt like that's what I had to stick to. I didn't know that the stakes...
talk several hours a day and your voice gets tired.
It's true. Almost there, though. I didn't know the stakes were anything other than temporary disappointment. Eventually I went to work, troubled but oblivious.
Bluetooth disconnected. Bluetooth pairing.
No, that's all right. It was perfect time for some laughter. Eventually I went to work, troubled but oblivious to another impending apocalypse. The last time I talked to Alma was late that Monday night. I texted her good night and that I hoped her day had gotten better. She said she'd be fine and we just needed some time. I didn't hear from her at all on Tuesday, but that wasn't completely out of character, so I wasn't too nervous. But by the time Wednesday afternoon rolled around and I still hadn't heard from her, I got scared. I called her friend that she'd been staying with. She hadn't seen her since Monday night. I called her parents to see if she'd gone to stay with them. Nope. Alma was a painter and had a little studio near where she was staying at her friend's house. I decided to go check there. When I arrived, the door was locked and nobody was responding. There was a tiny window, too small to fit through, but you could see most of the studio from it. I covered my eyes and looked through the glass. Alma was on the floor, unresponsive. My first instinct was she had relapsed and overdosed, and I called 911 in a panic. I'd find out not much later that she had intentionally taken her life sometime late Monday night or early Tuesday morning. The weeks and months that followed are a blur. The details of Alma's last month would come to light slowly. She'd actually left 3 suicide notes with 3 different dates on them. Whether she'd attempted on those days and didn't succeed, or whether she wrote those notes and never tried, I'll never know. But to pin Alma's suicide exclusively to addiction would be a disservice to her. To get to the root of it, we'd have to go back into her whole life story, into her early childhood up until her last day, and everything in between. And we don't have time for that today. But there's 2 things that I do want to mention. First, like me, Alma's suicidal thoughts went back to her childhood, long before her struggles with addiction began. But in her own words, via the note she left, the final decision was because she was afraid she'd never be able to get clean. That to keep on living was akin to subjecting her loved ones to a lifetime of disappointment, and to subject herself to a lifetime of being a disappointment. Anybody here who's lost someone to addiction, whether it be suicide or overdose or any other means, knows we'd much rather endure a lifetime of relapse and recovery with them here with us than go through a lifetime without them. I wish I'd made that clear to Alma. I wish I had known to make it clear. I wish I knew how to tell all of you how to make that clear to your loved ones. We as a society are very backwards in our treatment of addicts and addiction, and we have a long way to go in learning how to deal with it effectively, let alone humanely. But one thing that should be absolutely clear to everyone is alienation and shame don't work, and only increase the number of bodies on the ground. As crazy as it sounds, Alma's suicide may have saved my life in one way. After experiencing losing her and being witness not just to my own grief, but to the grief of her parents and her sister, her friends, and our community, after going through that, I could never take my own suicidal thoughts seriously again. This isn't to say I don't have them. Like I said at the beginning of this, I've always had them, continue to, and I expect to have them from time to time for the rest of my life. But since Alma's suicide, anytime I have a suicidal thought, all I need to do is take myself back to that moment in late November 2011, as I stood in the middle of the street on an autumn afternoon, police and paramedics rushing by me, as I called her mom to tell her that Alma was gone. And I could never be the reason someone has to make that call. So I've come to see my suicidal thoughts like an allergy. In the same way someone with allergies reacts to seasonal changes with a stuffy nose and all the discomfort that goes with that, my body's reaction to unfathomable futures is to want to avoid the future altogether. And I've had many unfathomable futures since Alma died. Sometimes as a result of my own actions, others as a result of things completely out of my control. But regardless, those suicidal thoughts always creep back in. But like a seasonal stuffy nose, I ride them out until the pollen of uncertainty settles and I can breathe normally again. It's annoying, but it's part of who I am. Suicidal thoughts are as much me as anything else in my personality. So much so that I don't really know who I am without them. Ironically, a future without suicidal thoughts is, by all measures, unfathomable. So finally, let's talk about hope. Hope and despair are two sides of the same coin. If we're being honest with ourselves, all futures are unsure. Every moment of our lives, we're accompanied by an invisible list of infinite possibilities for our future. Many of them amazing, many of them tragic, and most of them mundane. Got a little friend here. With every choice we make, no matter how big or small, that list narrows down ever so slightly. Whether it's choosing cereal or eggs for breakfast, or whether it's choosing who we spend our lives with, each of these decisions we make eliminates some possible futures. But every so often something happens, either because of a choice someone else made, or a natural event, or a choice of ours not panning out how we planned. And we're faced with a list that's been narrowed down to futures that we haven't bothered to imagine yet. Futures without the safeties and comforts that we planned on. Futures that are unfathomable. It's at this juncture that we hold that coin in our hands. One side being hope, the other despair. I'm going to spend the little time I have left up here telling you why not only there is hope, but why it's always the right choice. Let's start with human nature. We're programmed for hope, even the most oppressed among us. We choose hope constantly, countless times on any given day. To be dark for a moment, tragedy is a possibility at any and every moment. When you got in your car to drive here today, you secretly hoped that there wouldn't be some terrible accident on the way here. You subconsciously chose hope. Hope that things would go as you imagined, and you'd find yourself here, listening to me for maybe a little longer than you hoped. Every time you eat out, you subconsciously hope that the food wasn't contaminated along the way to your plate. Every time you get out of bed in the morning, you're hoping the world beyond your bed proves to be at least as safe as your bed. Every time you go to sleep, you're hoping you wake up. Now, I'm not saying this all to scare you. On the contrary, I'm saying this to reassure you. We choose hope constantly. It's as natural to our existence as breathing. In fact, I'd say breathing itself is the most basic act of hope. Look around us. Everything is hope. Look at all the buildings. Someone designed them in the hopes that they'd be built. Dozens of construction workers went to work every day, hoping that everyone else had done their job correctly and that they were working in a safe environment. And people choose hope over and over again until the job was done, and people enter them every day with hopes in their hearts. Look at the trees. At some point, an older tree generated seeds in hopes they'd fall to the ground and be germinated with water and sunlight, and the seed would grow into a big, powerful tree too. Every one of us here is the product of millions of people over countless millennia, hoping that their children would grow into adults and have children of their own. Everything is hope. History is a story, and its moral is that hope triumphs. The meaning of life is hope. Every one of us here has chosen despair sometimes. It's only natural. Opposites necessitate each other. So in a world built on hope, we need despair to remind us from time to time why hope is essential. But the point isn't to never despair. It's not to get stuck in that despair. Every one of us, even if we're never thought of suicide, has feared a worst case scenario, even assumed it to be inevitable. But how often has it come true? Sometimes, sure, every rule has an exception. But despair almost always turns out to be a myth that we tell ourselves to prepare for the worst. And hope almost always turns out to be the truth, a logic built on the indications of history. In closing, if you've lost someone to suicide, it's easy to focus on their despair. After all, it's what took them from us. But I challenge you to focus on their hope, because the depth of their despair implies the height of their hopes when they were here with us. I've lost more people to suicide since losing Alma, and one thing that has been true of every single one of them, Alma included, was that they had the greatest capacity for hope and joy of anyone I've known. Invariably, people who have the capacity to feel the lowest feelings humans can feel also have the capacity to feel the greatest feelings that humans can feel. And they usually did. Their despair, while responsible for their deaths, is almost always the exception to their lives. That's why it's so common to hear after someone has taken their life how much joy they brought to others. People who've been lost to suicide are often known for being uniquely happy. This only adds to the shock and horror of their deaths. We assume people who are seemingly capable of so much joy and warmth to such a degree must be happy all the time. But the truth is, they just feel everything so very deeply, both the good and the bad. Alma was one of the happiest people that I ever knew. At first, the way she died challenged that understanding, but it's come to reinforce it. Of course, somebody who was so prone to joy was capable of feeling the worst despair that one can feel. Opposites necessitate each other. So if you've lost someone, don't lose yourself in the sadness that you missed. Count yourself as lucky for the joy that you caught. Lastly, if you're somebody like me who struggles with suicidal thoughts, whether that's been the case your whole life or it's something new, I'm not going to pretend it's easy. At my lowest points, there's been nothing more annoying than someone saying to me, "It's not so bad." If it's not so bad, that means something's wrong with me, that I'm incapable of judging how things ought to feel. Maybe it is so bad. And if your response to that is thinking about suicide, remember, you're not crazy. Clearly, I hope it's not where your mind goes, but if it is, you're not alone. You're normal. You're human. But remember, this despair is one side of a coin, and the other side of it, hope, always wins. None of us would be here if that wasn't true. And just as importantly, talk to somebody. You don't even need to look at it like asking for help. Our feelings can be like pressure building inside of us, and sometimes just the act of opening our vents and letting some of that pressure out can be enough to walk us back from the edge. And to everybody here, whatever your relationship to suicide may be, the most important thing that you can do for anybody, whether it's the person that you love the most in the world or a complete stranger, is to pay attention. Attention is the most basic form of love, and being paid attention to reminds us that we're not alone, that we're human, and that we belong. If anyone here doesn't have someone they feel comfortable talking to and needs someone to talk to, please find me after the event and I'll give you my information. I can't make anything better, but I promise you'll have my attention. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for giving us hope. It takes courage to tell your story, and David will be here throughout the whole event today. He'll be working around the art table today and walking around. Please reach out and share stories with one another. If you're new to the event this year, our walk goes to North Point or to the top of the hill. We asked a few people last year, got kind of lost, just turn back around and come back. We have music, raffles, food, and gathering and sharing our stories together. I invite all of you now to start the walk through the arch.
and we'll see you when you get back. Thank you.